Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James. This is Justin, and today we're going to present our sustainable plan for Singapore 2050. Here's a quick agenda of what we're going to do today, same as everyone else, so we're just going to skip right to the content. Okay. So we're going to introduce a quick introduction. Then we're going to jump right into the inspiration, vision, and design choices we made for our plan for sustainable Singapore. And we're going to end off with a quick conclusion and open the floor for any questions and concerns from anyone else. So here, welcome to Singapore. So Singapore is a city-state located in Southeast Asia, right next to Malaysia. It has a landmass of 720 square kilometers, making it one of the smaller cities in the world. Despite being one of the smallest cities, it hosts a huge population of 5.77 million people today. And that number is expected to increase to 6.4 million by 2030, and the population increase rate is going to decrease, and it's going to end up at 6.68 million people in 2050. And it's with that reason that we believe and we suspect that any infrastructure changes and design choices in 2050 wouldn't be as far off from those already proposed for 2030, just because of the lower increase in population. And despite having virtually no natural resources in a small landmass, Singapore has consistently and historically been one of the greener cities in the world. So here are some of the existing infrastructure and plans that are in place today. In terms of urban renewal and city growth, a lot of these initiatives are catered towards rejuvenating and redeveloping existing towns and estates to more sustainable and greener standards. With the Remaking Our Heartland initiative, and as well as the building of new town projects. One that's been a huge attention in media is a redevelopment of a precinct called Tengah into an unprecedented forest town. So a vast, immense amount of green and blue spaces within that built environment. Building services, right now they have BCA Green Mark scheme, which is synonymous to the LEED certification in North American cities. And as time moves forward, the policies are becoming more stringent and more strict in order to become a more sustainable city. With transportation systems, roads account for 12% of the city's land use today, which is almost as much as that for housing, which is 14%. So as we move forward, the Singaporean government actually wants to reduce the amount of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure projects that are being built onwards. So a lot of that policies is catered towards the increased use of active modes of transport as well as public transit. So by 2030, they plan to double the size of their metro, and they have all the other initiatives such as the Walk, Cycle, Ride, and Walk to Ride program that kind of caters towards the more active modes of transport and creating new sheltered walkways or new cycling paths. So that's kind of like a quick illustration of what the transit line would look like. So all the dotted lines are the new developments in production. So it's very expensive. It's very, very expensive. In terms of energy, Singapore has a target to reduce its emissions intensity by 36% from 2005 levels by 2030, and to stabilize that. And a huge player in achieving that is through improving energy and carbon efficiency, which is done through 4 different strategies that they plan on doing. Is to achieve 75% use of public transport by 2030, achieve the BCA Green Mark standards for 80% of all buildings by 2030, reduce plastic incineration, and improve the energy efficiency in desalination and used water treatment. So some of the inspiration that we kind of gathered aren't particularly new. It's been done before. The first one being the vision of being city in a garden, which has been done by Singapore for decades. And we believe as we move towards 2050, Singapore would continue to evolve and better embody the vision that made it the urban garden it is today. And through that, we enrich the biodiversity in the urban landscape, introducing more green spaces to liven up the streetscape, and rejuvenating parks and other green spaces. Now to Justin.
So our second vision is pretty much we want to reduce the energy consumption in Singapore. So we want to import in the passive cooling technologies, and since Singapore does not require any heating at all, it only has over 3,000 cooling degree days. So by using less active cooling, you reduce the energy consumption. And we took ideas such as the net zero energy buildings from the solar exercise. So moving on to the infrastructure design, let's start with buildings. So our 4 key strategies would be, as I said before, passive cooling. We want to have green roofs, reuse gray water, and also implement all low energy fixtures and also appliances. So In a standard building, over 3/4 of consumption of energy is by major appliances such as the AC, the hot water, and also the fridge. And if we, for all the upcoming new buildings that are being made, if we were to just use simple passive design such as having like shades, it is expected that you can have up to 40% reduction in energy consumption. And by implementing these green roofs on all these new buildings, this not only coincides with our division of city in the garden, it's also proven in Singapore that by just having green roofs at the top, you would reduce the AC consumption by 14.5%. And as for the other aspect of buildings, we want to focus on the water consumption of Singapore. And this is two major concerns in Singapore in general. First is the high consumption of water. In Singapore, an average person per day would consume over 280 liters, and which is pretty high compared to other Asian cities. And the other is that Singapore is really dependent on imported water and has a huge concern from water scarcity. Since, as I said, for over 1/3 of its water is being imported from Malaysia, and every year this import water is costing them more and more, which is why they want to be more independent. And to counter these concerns, the two solutions we propose for these buildings would be the reuse of gray water and to implement low flow fixtures. As some other groups have already said before, the benefits of using these gray water system would reduce the domestic water of up to 40 gallons per cap per day, which results in Singapore households a reduction of over 54% of domestic water. And these gray water could also be used for the irrigation for the green roofs of the building itself. And by just simply implementing or upgrading the local fixtures such as aerators, we can reduce the water consumption by up to 30%. And I'll pass on to James to talk about transportation.
Now, there's a lot of actions being taken by the Singaporean government and the public to address transportation issues, but the three highlighted today is that we believe that Singapore 2050 would have a car-like infrastructure with an integrated transportation network and low-carbon fuel vehicles. So what is a car-like infrastructure? So basically, if you take a look in the picture on the right, that is Bencoolen Street, which is a street located in downtown Singapore, and that is undergoing a recent redesign into a more car-like design. And what it would look like, it would look like that. So basically, they take two of the lanes for private vehicles and switch that towards cycling and walking paths. So basically, car-like infrastructure prioritizes public transit operation and other active modes of transportation as opposed to private transport. And with that same philosophy, they're trying to incorporate that vision into other aspects of the transportation infrastructure, incorporating complete street elements, having it more public, pedestrian-friendly and cyclist-friendly, increasing the rail network line to double its capacity, as well as the inclusion of more car-free town centers in future towns. Something will look like that, which is a vision for Hong Kong that we kind of took. The new development that we mentioned earlier of the forest town, it actually would include the first car-free town center with cars running underneath the pedestrian-friendly hub. Next is the integrated transportation network. So that would mean we would include integrated transportation hubs, meaning they are basically interchanges that seamlessly link to other stations and stops, as well as adjoining commercial developments. There's an example of in San Francisco that's being designed. Basically, in doing that, we connect riders and commuters to different modal types of transports, and in doing that, kind of solve the first and last mile kind of issues in transportation. And we also look towards beyond the public transportation, public-private transport collaborations to form strong intermodal partnerships with taxi, car sharing, and bike sharing providers. Having like a strong partnership between the different modes of transport, we believe that Singapore would be able to kind of connect commuters from one mode of transport to another, and in that kind of incentivize people on using more sustainable modes of transport other than private vehicles. Another initiative that's being undertaken is low carbon fuel vehicles. Right now they're testing the viability of electric vehicles, and with an initiative called the Blue SG EV initiative, which is a car sharing initiative. They're testing it out so far, and we believe that if it does prove viable, it would be a huge player in transportation infrastructure in the future. Other than that, some of the buses in Singapore now are not within the current Euro emission standards, and opting those out for a greener fleet would significantly help the GHG reduction in the transportation infrastructure. All in all, we believe that with the public and private partnerships, and if ride-sharing were to replace all conventional traffic in 2050, we would decrease the number of private road vehicles on the road by 90% or 65% during peak hours. And by 2050, we hope that 85% of the trips will be made on public transport. Currently, it's 66%. Passing that to Justin.
So for land use in Singapore, our 4 key strategies are reclaim of the additional land, development of some of current reserved land, to intensify new developments, which is we want to build vertically instead of horizontally, and to recycle land with lower intensity uses to achieve a higher land productivity. So in here, just a simple a table of comparing the old master plan to what we imagine in the future in 2050. And most of all, we just want to focus on terms of housing because of the increase in population. And in next up, this would be one of the land use plans. And I'm not sure you can see it, but the yellow part would be the reserved land, which is currently not being used and being developed. And it's envisioned that on the east side of the island will be mostly for commercial and residential, and on the west side will be for the mostly industrial land use, which is already being seen like mostly purple colored. And another important to the land use is that we want to connect all the different parks and also the rail lines to the bicycle track, so then we could promote more active transport.
Moving on to the neighborhood design, forgive the 5-year-old drawing. So I think it's a lot to look at, but there are 4 points that I want to talk about in this. So the first one being the positioning of the transportation hub. That's centered around the epicenter of the town, and it is connected to the adjoining commercial and residential sites. And number 2 is the different sizes of buildings, the mid, high-rise, and low-rise buildings. And the reason why we have a really huge, diverse kind of placement is that because one of the key strategies in Singapore right now is they want to juxtaposition a lot of buildings at different heights and intersperse with green spaces to kind of maintain the vibrancy of the city instead of having a monotone design of just high-rises in one lane. James Jacobs kind of touched upon how that would have a very negative implication on human well-being. And number 3 is that there are light lines signifying walking trails, and we also employ a philosophy called the super block. That meaning like their main road infrastructure, so circles around the perimeter of another block, which is pretty much centered around pedestrian and cyclist friendly kind of nature, culture. So yeah, just a system of high-rise with low-rise buildings, and the walking trails in between the buildings lined with urban vegetation and greenery, the walking entrance trails, as well as the super blocks, having people space in the middle, as well as the car junctions all around. Next.
So for the energy consumption or like electric generation in Singapore, currently it's mostly 95% natural gas, and there's some little bit of fossil fuel and a little bit of solar. And the rough estimation for 2050 for some of the current existing research, it proves that they could have renewables, which is just mainly solar, up to 25%, natural gas with some 75%. But based on our vision of I want to have in Garden City, we want to have more focus on greens and stuff, which is why on a more conservative scale, we decided to keep natural gas at 95%, with the rest being changed to all renewables, such as the solar.
In terms of water supply, I think Justin mentioned it a little bit earlier. 40% is by new water, salinated water. For 2050, we kind of tried to tip the balances a little bit by adding one more new water plant, wastewater treatment plant, one desalination plant to reduce the amount of the reliance on Malaysia's imported water. And a key strategy to that is to maximize rainwater harvest, ways of recycling water, and desalinate even more water. Other than that, there's also the managing demand side of it, which is tackled throughout the pricing, the measures, and the other encouraging water conservation practices to incentivize better water consumption ethics.
As for wastewater, we didn't touch it since the current infrastructure is already capable of meeting 2050 demands. But as for solid waste, construction materials have a high recycle waste, whereas domestic waste is really low, below 20%, which therefore our two main strategies to that is using the public disposal, waste disposal idea from Taipei, so reduce consumption by forcing them to change it. Okay, and the other one is about digester, which is another idea taken from Sacramento, California. It's an digester which converts organic waste to natural gas, electricity, and fertilizer, so it helps relieve some of the energy demands. And as for the emission in general, it is sad to say that our design cannot meet our targets, but this is massively due to because 90% of our emissions is come from the non-residential sector, which is mostly the industrial and the energy transmission sector, which it's out of the scope of our project, so we couldn't really change too much into it. And as for urban metabolism, this was simple drawings before and after, and you can see that mostly all our consumptions went up except for the transport sector, since we have a decrease in private vehicles and increase in a lot of public transport.
Well, so we tried our best to kind of address some of the SDG 11 targets, mostly through the transportation systems, through expansion and revitalization of public transportation infrastructure, and in developing a more car-like infrastructure, protect the natural cultural heritage to the preservation of green spaces, access to safe and accessible green and public spaces through more green spaces and development of more inclusive town hubs, as well as addressing the air quality and municipal and waste management, and closing more loops when it comes to solid and energy and the introduction of new facilities such as biodigesters.
So in conclusion, Singapore is a extremely green city, and a lot of their limits, such as the limited land use and renewable energy limits, a lot of our different ideas, and we would in the future want to look into like nuclear technology, which currently right now politically and socially it's not as acceptable, but we hope that it will be more. It could be implemented in after 50 years, so then we could massively reduce the energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.